Welcome to Things You Don't Know, the podcast that attempts to bring to light little known people and the things that they've done, and well known people and unknown things about what they have contributed. Today, we have a very special addition to our celebration of Black History Month, Robert Smalls. Sean, who is Robert Smalls?
Well, he's one of the unsung heroes of the Civil War and a great leader for civil rights after that period. He's like some of the other people we have profiled, dealing with the greatest horror in human history, slavery, but having to acquire his own methods, a little less organized than someone like Caesar Drake. I encourage you to check that podcast out. But an effective way of securing his own freedom.
John, maybe could you fill us in on some of the factual information? When was he born? When did he die?
Well, he was born on April 5th in 1839 in Beaumont, South Carolina. And he learned about, loss and tragedy very early in life, as did many slaves of the time, when his mother was sold to his master's son-in-law when he was 6 years old. Again, this is a rather common horror of the time, but Robert never saw her again for the rest of his life.
Wow. So he was just 8 when he lost his mother, huh?
Yep.
Okay. And all right. So apparently this upstanding, strong guy showed some early talent for hard work and was working outside the plantation by the age of 12 as a messenger and a stevedore. And apparently, with obviously some help, he partially taught himself to read. That's pretty amazing to me.
It is, particularly in a time when that was punishable by whipping or mutilation or even death.
Okay, so he had that experience, and then when he was 20, although he was still enslaved.
But he had been working on the docks for a very long time at this point as a stevedore. So he was very familiar with the inner workings of shipping, trade, and operating the boat. He was a pilot, correct?
Yeah. Okay, so he's a pilot. He is, quote unquote, a good slave. Sorry about that. We're just reporting facts. We're not supporting the issue here. At 20, he's still enslaved, but somehow he was able to buy his wife, and he obviously married her. They had some children. Now, at that time, slaves working outside the plantation were required to buy and carry a pass. Is that right, Sean?
Yes, this was a particular indignity of South Carolinian slavery. This pass was actually worn around the person's neck to show they had permission to be outside the plantation. But he was, as you say, rightfully concerned about the future enslavement of his children. So at the outbreak of the war, he's assigned as a pilot to a vessel called the CSS Planter. And in May of 1862, he and several other people working who are also enslaved, working on this vessel, take advantage of the fact that the captain and his helpers have left.
His white helpers.
Yes. And get their freedom. They go and rescue their families and sail under fire and finally turn the ship over to Union officials at Fort Sumter.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating that, all right, he steals a ship, He goes to a rendezvous point and picks up his family, and I think some other people too, other slaves, families too.
The families of the other slaves of his impromptu crew.
Yeah, and then he's fired on by by Union gunships, and then somehow he gets to Fort Sumter, which had been captured by Union forces, and says, "Hey guys, I got this ship here for you." Yeah.
But it wasn't just the ship. The cargo on that ship was guns. Is that correct?
Yes, there were over 30 guns on the ship, as well as a large portion of rice and some indigo that was used for dyeing clothing. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton said, "This is the most valuable ship turned over to the Union Army till that point in the war." So Smalls is heralded as a hero. He's only 23 at the time.
Wow.
And because he's literate and intelligent, he starts to consult with some of the top federal leaders at that time. He designs a Teamster building program and recruits free people to work with General Sherman and his campaigns, and even consults with Abraham Lincoln himself about some of the status of these formerly enslaved people.
You know, he also did something with something called the South Island Experiment, which was a group of islands that were given the permission to be self-governing and run by former slaves in Georgia and the Carolinas. Smalls wrote the Constitution for the, quote, colored republic on St. Catherine's Island. Now, these islands in their self-governing experiment lasted about 5 years, but it was a moral and political adventure that was a good thing that they tried at least. Anyhow, it was a self-governing territory for freed people. And he worked with General Howard, Tunis Campbell. Campbell is president of the St. Catherine's Georgia Highlands.
And then something really wonderful happens. A great many of the plantations, while the war was going on, and then, of course, when the Confederates are defeated, are abandoned. So these become federal property, and they're seized and auctioned off. So he buys his former master's house.
Wow.
That's such a flex.
He must have felt like he was on top of the world.
I imagine, yeah.
But in an act of extreme compassion, he allows his former owner and his wife and family to stay in the house, even pays their train fare to bring them there. And one really horrible but morbidly amusing incident happens around this time.
The table incident. Okay.
Yes. Small's former owner refuses to eat at the same table with him.
No, it was just his former owner. His former owner's wife and children were actually rather okay with it, right?
They were, and he tries to speak to this man and basically say, "Look, the past is over. We've got to get along with each other as equals." And this former owner is so distressed he threatens to commit suicide. So Smalls at that point says, "Fine, you can eat somewhere else." More charitable than we might have been, Bill, I think, but
100 times more. I'm sure that if somebody owned me and then I got free and I offered them succorance, shelter, food, and they wouldn't even eat at the same table with me, I'd say, hit the road, Jack. But he didn't.
I think it's interesting to note that the former master's wife and children were okay with him eating at the table because marginalized communities like women, like minorities, like underage people do seem to band together. I mean, if you look throughout history, you're more likely to find women siding with minorities than the predominant males.
You're quite correct.
So he did a few other things, didn't he, Sean? He
Yes,
advocated for a national sales tax to support education. He tries to end debtor's prison, which failed at that time.
Well, this was after he was elected to Congress
5 times.
5 times, 5 terms. He served 5 terms in Congress, which I mean, I don't know if was he the first black congressman?
the first in the House had been a senator elected a year earlier, but he's one of
So yeah,
8 men elected to the House of Representatives in a 10-year period and 2 senators.
Wow.
so he was quite the trailblazer.
Exactly. And then he also championed women's suffrage, which goes to what, John, what you were just saying a moment ago about marginalized people banding together. He also wanted government support for a national canal system to improve interstate trade. A very forward-thinking kind of notion, actually.
Yes, he's also very active, along with the great abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, in a movement to make Haiti and the Dominican Republic U.S. states.
I thought that was Grant's idea.
It was, but Smalls and Douglass are the two prominent African American leaders who make this a national cause.
Ah, okay. That's interesting. And then he survived some phony charges. He was accused of raping his former master's wife. She later recanted, and then Small is blamed for the corruption of a carpetbagger in Atlanta. What do you know about that, Sean?
Hold on. First, I think we need to give a little brief explanation of what a carpetbagger is, because it sounds like some sort of slang insult rather than an actual government position.
Well, a carpetbagger was seen as someone who came from the North to southern states after the war and was trying to make a quick buck. And in many cases, they were hated more even than the former slaves were. Even racist movements like the Ku Klux Klan, they do terrible things to the formerly enslaved, but they also go after what they see as white sympathizers of this new egalitarian order they just can't stand.
Yeah, and it wasn't just that they were sympathizers. They did some very bad things.
And they were essentially profiteering off the war.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But to answer this question about Smalls, one of his secretaries had been accused of corruption in the selling of pardons from the War Department.
Ah,
When he got arrested, he basically said, "I didn't do it. My African American boss did it." And in the racial attitudes of the time, he's falsely convicted and then pardoned by people who have the sense to know that he would never do such a thing, as part of a deal as to which West Virginian delegation to sit in the 1881 Congress. He's given a pardon in exchange for dropping a claim for his Republican delegation to sit in the Congress. But he doesn't really have a choice at that point.
You said it was the racial inclinations of the time. I think it's important to mention that it does persist to today in many ways. It's sad, but it's true.
Unfortunately, you're right. He also is defeated when running for a sixth term because he wants to abolish the poll tax, which is an excuse to keep former people of African descent and even poor whites in the beginning away from the polls.
And then let's see, he also becomes a delegate to South Carolina State Constitutional Convention and tries to do away with literacy tests for voters. Another one of those things that is used for keeping people that you don't want to have vote from voting. And we're seeing that being replayed on the stage of American politics today. We are seeing it. I know that, Sean, you may disagree with me on that whole issue, but I think it is undermining the basic tenets of the Republic, and I resent it very much. Anyhow, he lost his attempt to do anything with the literacy tests at that time.
But he remains actively on the scene. He serves as the tax collector of Beaumont and is consulted by President McKinley, because after the Plessy decision that legalizes school segregation, there's a movement, even in North Dakota, to segregate the high schools in the late 1890s. And McKinley is against that. So Smalls helps him persuade North Dakotan officials not to do that. And he's also an advisor to Theodore Roosevelt, who asked for his approval before he has his famous dinner with Booker T. Washington, the great educator, in 1901.
Okay.
And he was an activist pretty much right up until the day he died, right? He even stopped a lynching at 75 years old.
Yes, this is a very moving, powerful story. A friend of his who had actually opened up a bank in Charleston, South Carolina, is falsely accused, as many were, of raping a white woman. And a group called the Knights of Mary Fagin, which is sort of a off-brand Klan group, is ready to murder this man. And Smalls hears about it, arms himself with a pistol, goes to where this young man is being held, stands in front of the jail, armed with this pistol, as I said, and says to the exalted Cyclops of the Klan, "I've been a slave. I fought for my freedom 50 years ago. You'll have to blow my head off to go near this young man." And even these terrible, bigoted Klansmen don't want to do that and go away. And thankfully, the young man is found innocent, and he stops a murder at the very end of his life. This is only 3 months before he dies.
Yeah. You know, it is a true thing that bullies usually are cowards. And I say that from a professional standpoint. It is my opinion. It has not been demonstrated technically by data, but by observation over many years. I would say that bullies are, and the Klan was a bully, still are, just like some of these other groups, Proud Boys and whomever else. They're bullies and they're cowards. Anyhow, this man played an important role in many things, and we should remember his name, and we should do your own research, folks, on this. He's interesting. There's a lot to be found. Some of the information, of course, about Civil War period of time is contradictory. Okay, but you can still find out the information that you want. We have a number of podcasts. Sean mentioned Carver. No, I'm sorry. He mentioned Caesar Drake, which we have a podcast on. And if you want to get to that podcast, easy peasy, go to YouTube, and then type in the search bar things you don't know, all smushed together, no apostrophes or anything, just things you don't know, 4275. Enter. It'll take you right to the site where the podcasts are. We are also soon to have our website up, and we have a bunch of blogs, blog posts on there that should be very entertaining and interesting. So, if you want to get to the podcast, if you go to YouTube and then in the search bar for YouTube, there's a little place there with a little looking glass thing, and you type in things you don't know 4275. It will take you to the site. Anyhow, enjoy. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. And hey, check back with us. We've got a bunch of things coming out.
Thanks, folks.
Go ahead, click like, subscribe. Don't forget to click the reminder bell so you get updated when we come out with something new. We should have at least one more podcast up for Black History Month. Don't miss that one. It might surprise you.
Indeed. All right, folks. Thanks a lot. Bye.